Welcome to Victory Baptist Church. This message is from November 14th, 2021, and it was delivered by John Finley. So come along as we continue our search through the book of Luke.
I want to start at the end of the episode here this morning, and then we'll come back around and look at the beginning. Right at the end, Jesus says, I tell you, it says that Jesus marveled at him, and turning the crown and following him. I tell you, I've not even in Israel have I found such faith. In the gospel, this word for marvel is used 30 times. But only 3 times out of those 30 instances is it in reference to Jesus. And actually, there's only 2 events in which it is referenced to Jesus. One is here that we looked at, and over in the book of Matthew, chapter 8, where there's a parallel account. That word is used again, that Jesus marveled. But the other time that it's used is over in Mark, and that's where I want to begin this morning. In Mark chapter 6, I want to just read for you the first 6 verses there. It says, he went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. And he could do no mighty work there except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went out about among the villages teaching. But notice here, we really have on the 2 opposite ends of the scale of faith. In his hometown, it says that he marveled at their, not because of their faith, but because of their unbelief. They had no faith in him. Whereas over in the passage that we're considering this morning, he marvels at the faith of the centurion. And this word here, thumazo, in the Greek, it means to become full of wonder. And we have to understand here that when it says that he marveled, it's not as though Jesus was taken by surprise. You know, there's a theology out there today that's called the openness of God. Have any of you ever heard of that one? Just a couple. And what that theology says, and it's a heresy actually, says that when we wake up in the morning, we go do something, God might be surprised at what's happening. Well, we know that we are not going to surprise God, right? And here, when Jesus sees these people that are not believing in him, he doesn't marvel because he's surprised at the fact that they're not believing in him. It's more like, and you've probably all had this happen to you, you think of somebody that you know really well, and all at once something will come out of your mouth and you kind of go, I can't believe they said that. It's that kind of a marvel that that they're talking about that Jesus had as they do not believe in him, and he marvels at them. But again, it's not surprise. In John chapter 2 and verse 24, after Jesus has done some things and people are following him, and it says, but Jesus on his part was not entrusting himself to them, for he knew all men. And because he did not need anyone to testify concerning man, for he himself knew what was in man. So there's nothing that we're going to do, or what these people did in the Gospels here, that is going to surprise our Savior. And that the word for astonished there is used many times in relation to Jesus' ministry among the people, where it talks about they're amazed, they're astonished. And just a quick example, Mark 1:22, it says they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes. And again, this is an astonishment because they just can't believe what they're hearing because they've never heard these things before. So we see here in a passage I just read from Mark, this was Jesus' hometown. These people knew him, and yet they had no faith in him. And it just kind of shows how deep rebellion runs in man. And as Jesus walked this earth, he found humanity to be shallow, skeptical, stubborn, self-seeking, manipulative, and unbelieving. Things haven't changed much, have they? Because we find the same thing in our world today. And if any place there was going to be salvation happening, you would have thought it would have been in Nazareth, Jesus' hometown. But it doesn't. And yet, as we come to the passage here in Luke chapter 7, we find that belief happens in a very unlikely place, and we'll see that as we go forward here. The Israelites thought the prerequisite for salvation is religious works, but the problem is that only leads to self-righteousness, which really gains us nothing in the sight of God. But as you read the Gospels and you listen to some of the characters that are in there, and they talk about what they think is going to get them into heaven, it's following the law, it's doing good works, it's doing all of these things. And Jesus says that's not enough, because the chief prerequisite, of course, is faith, and before faith comes is humility. And we're going to see that in today's passage, because humility leads to faith, and that's what we see here in the case of this centurion. And when Jesus marvels at him, it's more like, wow, this guy really gets it. He understands what I've been trying to teach all around in Israel, and yet unheeded. So we're going to look at, I kind of divided it into what I call 3 scenes that teach us important truths that lead us to a faith that would amaze Jesus. The first scene we see the centurion in regard to his very sick servant here. And as we begin the story, we want to notice, first of all, some things about where this is happening. Jesus, having completed his message in the plain there that several of the men have talked about over the past weeks here, he's done and he's on the move again now. And it says that he, in verse 1, after he had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. Now, what do you know about Capernaum? This is a place, actually, that Jesus called home, if you could put it that way, maybe better described. It was the headquarters out of which Jesus and his disciples maneuvered around the countryside. When Matthew gives us the incident of Jesus and the temptations out in the wilderness, after that has happened, it says that immediately after his temptation in the wilderness, Matthew tells us that leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea. And it was in this place that we are this morning, in Capernaum. And Capernaum is a place where Jesus did a lot of miracles. He did some in the temple and then outside of it, even in his home. In Luke chapter 4 and verse 31 to 35, it says that he came down to Capernaum, the city of Galilee, and he was teaching them on the Sabbath. And they were amazed at his teaching. You see, there's that word amazed again. For his message was with authority. In the synagogue there was a man possessed by the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Let us alone. What business do we have with each other, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of Israel." Or the Holy One of God, excuse me. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." And when the demon had thrown him down in the midst of the people, he came out of him without doing him any harm. So that was one of the first miracles that Jesus performed at Capernaum. And we probably, most of us, I hope at least, remember the incident when the man, the paralytic, that they couldn't even get him in the house. Do you know whose house that was? It was a place where Jesus stayed, right there in Capernaum. And they come and they rip up the roof on Jesus' house. And in that miracle that Jesus performed there, just in the introduction of it, says that it was reported that he was at home. So that's where Jesus would come, and he would stay, sometimes for days, and then they would be off again out amongst the people. But there were many other miracles that took place in Capernaum as well. So this town was not unfamiliar to Jesus at all. And as I said, it has a reputation of being a town where Jesus worked many miracles. And there's one more I want to look at before we go on, though, and that's in John chapter 4 and verse 46, another miracle that Jesus performed. Actually, he wasn't in Capernaum, but the miracle occurred in Capernaum when the ruler in Capernaum had a son who was sick, and he sent to Jesus for help. Jesus himself was actually in Cana at the time, but beginning in verse 46, if you're there, it says, "So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, 'Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe.' The official said to him, 'Sir, come down before my child dies.' And Jesus said to him, 'Go, your son will live.' The man believed the word of Jesus, that Jesus spoke to him, and went on his way. And as he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering." And the story goes on, as you'll recall, he asked the people, "When did it happen?" And it was at the very moment that Jesus spoke the words. Keep that one in the back of your mind, because we're going to come back to that a couple of times here as we work through this story in Luke 7. Then there's one other thing I want you to know about Capernaum, where all of these miracles took place. All that Jesus did, all that Jesus said, didn't do any good for the city of Capernaum. In Matthew chapter 11, we read the woes upon some cities here. He says, he began to denounce the cities where most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. And remember now, Capernaum was one of those. It says, "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it is more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And now listen, and you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you that it would be more tolerable in the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you." And so this is I brought all of this as a backdrop to help us understand where this centurion, who Jesus said he found great faith in him, this is the environment in which this man lived. And really an unlikely place for that to happen, with all of the unbelief that was taking place there. So as we move on now, we see that Luke tells us that there's this centurion. He says in verse 2, a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. And when the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue." Matthew, in his parallel account, tells us that this servant was paralyzed and suffering terribly. Luke here says that he was at the point of death. And what we do know about this centurion right now is that he is desperate to save the life of his servant. Just a couple of things about this scene that seem a little out of the ordinary when you think of the people involved here. First of all, we've got the centurion. He's got a servant that says he is highly valued by him. And normally in the relationship between a servant and a master, there's always seems like there's a little bit of a distance, that the servant is there to obey what the master says, and that's it. But you can almost infer here that this centurion valued this servant in such a way that this servant was almost like a son to him. That it says that he was highly valued by him. And so you kind of feel like he loved him just as he would a son. And then there's another relationship here that seems a little out of character, and that is that when he needs help, he goes to, it says he calls them the elders of the Jews. So these would have been the officials in the synagogue there. And again, you're talking about a Gentile now going to these Jews and asking for their help. And the one thing that we can say is that this relationship was one, on the centurion's part for a servant, was one of compassion. And the ones he turns to are those who you wouldn't normally think that a Gentile would look to for help. So it says when the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to the elders and asked them to come and help go to Jesus and plead for him. So what do you think the centurion says that when he heard about Jesus, what do you think the things are that he had heard about him? Remember now the story we just had read about the official who had a son that was sick. I'm sure he'd heard about that because, Capernaum was not that large of a city, and it's quite likely that he had this running through his mind at the time. So he sends them to see Jesus to see if he would come and save the life of his servant. Now, take a look at the basis for which the elders give to Jesus that he should come and help this servant. It says they pleaded with him, saying, "He is worthy to have you come to do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who has built us our synagogue." So here's where it gets interesting. The words here in the Greek have connotations that we don't pick up in the English. And this tells us so much about the Jewish understanding of what it means to be worthy. This word worthy comes from the word axios, or axios, I guess is be a better pronunciation of it. And if you're a news buff, maybe you've seen this news organization that's called Axios. But this word axios indicates a worth that is based on merit or function or the actions of a person. And so they say give two reasons why Jesus should do this for him. And that is because he loves us, and he built us this building for us. So for those reasons, you ought to come and do this for him. And while this gives us a little insight into the type of man he was. He was a good guy. But more than that, it gives us insight into the Jewish doctrine of salvation. And the fact that he's a good guy, my wife, she likes to, when we're talking about things and somebody's name will come up, and she'll say something like, "He's a really good guy," or "They're a really good person." Well, that's what you would say about this centurion, wouldn't you? He's a really good person. I mean, he cared about his servant, and he'd done all of these things for the Jews. And so on that basis, they say to Jesus, "He's worthy. You need to come and help him because of all of the things that he's done for us." So you see the theology of the Jewish leaders here. They thought deliverance was earned. They thought miracles and healings and even forgiveness were given to those who were worthy of it. And if you did enough things, then you deserved whatever you requested. And we see that theology evident in the way these men approach Jesus. Now, Jesus doesn't refute that theology here or even correct them on it. It just says that Jesus, in verse 6, he says, "And Jesus went with them." So we come to what I consider the second scene here. This story takes an unexpected turn as Jesus approaches the house of the centurion. And this scene will teach us what real faith is. Now, Jesus had consented to go with the Jewish leaders to heal the servant. But now as they get close to the house, they're not at the house yet, but as they're getting close, the centurion realizes that Jesus is really coming. And I've asked him to come, but all at once now he sends some other friends. It doesn't say they're of the Jewish persuasion or even rulers at this point. In verse 7, actually it's verse 6, it says, when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. And so all at once there's a change in the story here where they're coming. And now he says, Lord, don't come to my house. You don't need to do that. And we'll see that in just a minute. But he says that I am not worthy to have you under my roof. Now, the leaders of Israel had told Jesus that he was worthy of him to do this. And the centurion has a different take on it. He says, I'm not worthy, so don't even come under my house. But he uses a different word here. The first word that the leaders used in regard to him was axios. But here he uses the word hikanos. And it has the meaning of sufficient or competent. And literally what the centurion is saying here, sending word to Jesus, he says, I am not enough. I'm not enough. He didn't say, I haven't done enough. He said, I am not enough. Quite a difference in the thought there. And this is the same word that John the Baptist used in Luke chapter 3 when the people were questioning him about whether he might be the Christ. And he answers and he says, I baptize you with water, but he who is mightier than I is coming, the strap of whose sandals I am not worthy, hikanos, to untie. And Paul also used that word in 1 Corinthians 15:9 when he says, for I am the least of the apostles, unworthy, hikanos, to be called an apostle. See, this is what true humility looks like. This man understood that in regard to the Lord of the earth, there was no criteria that makes one worthy or makes one enough to be in his presence. And so he sends word, Jesus, you don't need to come because I am not enough. But he goes on and says, therefore I did not presume to come to you, but say the word and let my servant be healed. Now in the version that we're reading out of it says, I did not presume to come to you. In the New King James, it is put this way, I did not even think myself worthy, axios, to come to you. And so at the beginning, he said, I didn't even think myself worthy enough because of what I'd done to come to you. But now that you're coming, Jesus, I realize I'm not enough to even have you here, let alone that I haven't done enough. And so this is the kind of humility that the Lord requires. But that isn't all. There's more to this man's response. As we go on in verse 7 there, he says at the end, he says, but say the word and let my servant be healed. Humility is important because it leads to faith. But as we continue on, we see the reason for this man's faith. Jesus, as he's coming, this man says, for I too am a man set under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servants, do this, and he does it. His words here reveal a recognition that Jesus was a man that had greater authority than this man had ever seen. He knew what authority was. He was a man who was, first of all, under authority. If he got orders from the emperor, he followed them. So he knew what it was from that stand, but he also understood authority from the standpoint of having men under him. And he says, if I say to one, go, and he goes, and another come, he comes, and do this, he does it. And so again, I would refer you back to the healing of the ruler's son in John 4, when the ruler came to Jesus. He came pretty much with an unbelieving heart, because he said, you've got to come. But Jesus said, you guys are just looking for signs. Just go back. Your son's already healed. And we don't know this, of course, but I just use a little sanctified imagination here. I'll bet this centurion was thinking about the fact that when that ruler's son, who I'm sure he had heard that story, said all it took was the word of Jesus. He's saying through this men that he sent, he's saying, Lord, you don't have to come to my house. All you have to do is speak the word, because you have the authority to do that. You have the authority to heal. And I am not enough to have you come into my home. And so it says when the authority that this man had, the centurion had, was not anywhere near the authority that Jesus had, and he recognizes that in his statement when he says, all you have to do is say the word, and my servant will be healed. So now we come to the third and last scene. And you know, if you're writing a book or writing a story, you come to the end, you come to the climax. And here we come to the climax of this story. And that is Jesus, it says, when he heard those things, he marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, he said, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. It's interesting that Jesus says this, and it says he marveled at him, but nowhere in this account do we see that Jesus and this centurion ever come in physical contact. But Jesus hears what the man has said, and that is enough for him to recognize that this guy has a faith that he hasn't found anywhere else in Israel. And this had to be a pretty huge dose of reality for the people that were following him, because they followed Jesus everywhere he went at this point in his life, and yet they went unbelieving. And so when he turns and says to them, not even in Israel have I found such faith, they've got to be thinking, you know, what's the deal here? What does Jesus see in this man that we don't have? After all, we're Jews. We're the children of God. We're the children of Abraham. And so surely we are acceptable in his sight. But Jesus said, I haven't even found this kind of faith anywhere in Israel among the Jews. And so Jesus is delighted at this man, that he's finally found someone who has a real faith, a great faith in him. And then it closes in verse 10. It says, when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well, just as the man believed would happen, just at the word of Jesus. So you see, it's not the one who thinks himself worthy because of all that he's done that is accepted. The acceptable one is the one who knows that he's not enough, and therefore must throw himself on the mercy and grace of Jesus. In our world and many times in our churches, we hear this message that you are worth saving. You are worth dying for. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be wanted. You deserve all of these things. When in truth, that is not what the gospel is about at all. Romans 5:6-8 says, well, for while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would even dare to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And that's the whole point of the gospel, isn't it? That Christ came and he died when we weren't worth it. So, I know most of you here this morning, but I need to say this. if you're here and you've never come to that place where you've trusted in Jesus, do as this centurion did. Humble yourself before you're and recognize that you are not enough, and that Jesus has the authority and power to forgive your sin and make you new. Because only when we have that kind of faith will we really know what it is to follow Jesus. And for all you Christians here, in Luke chapter 9 and verse 23, he says, and he said to all, speaking to the people who were following him, that said they wanted to be his disciples, he said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily and follow me. What we've seen here today in the life of this centurion, I think, is the very definition of denying oneself. Daily we have to realize that we are not enough. And if we're to follow him and accomplish anything for Christ, we have to humble ourselves first of all. That's the beginning of faith, but the end of faith is recognizing that Jesus has the power and the authority, and apart from that, we are powerless to do anything for him. So let's be the kind of people that desire to amaze Jesus by humbling ourselves and believing in his power and authority. I want to conclude with a quote from John MacArthur in regard to this passage. He says, wouldn't I like to be a man who amazed Jesus, whose love, whose generosity, whose mercy, whose devotion, whose love of the truth, whose love for the people of God, whose love for God, whose humility, whose penitence, and whose great faith, and whose submission to the power and authority of Christ would amaze him. You don't want to settle for anything less. Let's pray.
Thank you for joining us for the Victory Podcast today. This podcast is a ministry of Victory Baptist Church in Hermiston, Oregon. We can be found at 193 East Main Street, or you can also look us up at www.yourvictory.org.